great, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. We have a very, very exciting panel here, a one-on-one discussion with Sergey to really go in depth about the Chainlink ecosystem and how actually the future of on-chain finance could look like. Sergey, it's great to have you with us today and to be able to have this conversation. By the way, many people know Sergey as the co-founder of Chainlink. But one thing you probably don't know about him, he's a massive gamer as well, a big fan of Cyberpunk on that perspective of the game. So I find there's a lot of actually people in crypto that are also gamers, which is quite amazing from that perspective. Sergey, let's kick it off. Maybe for the benefit of our audience, can you maybe give a quick 2-minute summary of what is Chainlink and what problem does it solve? And then we'll go dive right into the on-chain issues.
Sure. So Chainlink is a data transmission and value transmission layer surrounding all blockchains. So if you want to get data into, out of, or between chains, or you want to connect chains to each other, you basically need Chainlink to do that in a secure, reliable way. And this is very important because while blockchains are a place where you can put certain contractual conditions in the form of smart contracts, those contractual conditions really don't get executed unless they're connected to external data systems or other contracts on other chains. So basically, Chainlink solves this big universe of problems about how to generate contracts like DeFi, decentralized insurance, blockchain gaming, that don't really have the ability to exist without something called an oracle network, which is what Chainlink fundamentally invented, is decentralized oracle networks. And decentralized oracle networks basically verify and generate deterministic cryptographic guarantees about all these things that are outside of blockchains. And then they let those things interact with blockchains so that once you verify data to a certain level, that data can be reliable enough to control the value in a blockchain. And once you verify the connection between a chain, the two chains can interact with each other, and one can pay and one can receive. And basically all these large sets of problems surrounding blockchains and smart contracts need a highly reliable infrastructure that's as reliable as blockchains themselves. And so Chainlink provides that.
Maybe to clarify us on that point, can you share with our audience how you're able to provide that reliability of the data that is being provided to make sure that when it comes on chain with the oracles, that the information is accurate?
Sure. So the basic security and reliability assumption of the blockchain industry is that you have independent nodes, often called validators, arriving at the same conclusion to a transaction or a block of transactions against a set protocol, so a set of conditions against which a transaction can and cannot move forward. Blockchains come to this consensus about blocks of transactions. And those transactions are relatively simple computations or ledger value movements. So that's what blockchains do. They generate consensus from multiple independent nodes. Oracle networks, decentralized oracle networks, which is what Chainlink invented, do not generate blocks of transactions. Rather, they verify things about the external world by having multiple independent nodes verify that information, and then come to a consensus with multiple independent nodes agreeing that the state of the world is in a certain way. And this is a very high threshold for reliability and security for verifying things about the external world and for triggering things in the external world and for connecting chains. So for example, to do a blockchain transaction, you would need to generate a real-world asset. That would require data about the real-world asset, like the price, the NAV. Then you would want to move the real-world asset across chains. That would need another Chainlink network. The first Chainlink network was the one giving it the data. The second one would be the one moving it across chains in exchange for a stable coin. And then in order to move it across chains, you would also need to inject more data into it. So for example, identity data. And then you would have a whole bunch of similar problems, right? How do you get data into the contract? How does the contract trigger an external payment? How does the contract interact with chains and therefore other contracts? And all of that is validated through a set of nodes that come to consensus, right? So it's basically applying the security and reliability guarantees of consensus, but not to blocks of transactions, but to everything else, everything outside of a blockchain, is what Chainlink basically verifies and makes reliable enough to have a controlling role in regards to a smart contract.
So, it's very interesting because when I follow Chainlink, you guys have been doing a lot of work with actually financial institutions recently, from DTCC, ANZ, and many others. But obviously the reality you're describing with oracles and in a decentralized world is, if we assume that's where the financial industry is heading, How are you seeing traditional financial institutions, and there's many of them in the room today here, being able to adapt to this new reality? For example, I know you guys have something called the Cross-Chain Interoperability Protocol, the CCIP. How are they able to get a grasp and understand this new dynamic and actually overcome the challenges they're facing on that front?
Yeah, so we do work with multiple market infrastructures that process quadrillions of dollars a year each, and multiple banks that have over $1 trillion assets under management. So we are working with like the top tier of market infrastructures and the top tier of banks. And they are all in different stages of their understanding and their kind of urgency to solve this problem. The urgency dimension is really smaller digital banks are the fastest moving. Then you have mid-tier banks, then you have the larger banks, and then you have basically market infrastructures, and that depends if the market infrastructures have a government-issued monopoly in their country or not. That's the deciding factor on urgency. Urgency is a big dimension, and urgency is now being driven by everyone's users. So all of those groups, including asset managers and people on the buy side, are initially experiencing a push to do custody. So the first push in the institutional side of the blockchain industry has been to custody crypto assets like Bitcoin, Ether, any number of these existing cryptocurrencies. That's something we predicted very, very clearly many times many years ago, and it happened exactly as we said. Basically, custody, right, is like my clients come to me, they say they want to have an interaction with cryptocurrencies. That's what our clients want. That's what we do. The next stage of this is really real-world assets, and the banking sector and the buy-side asset management sector participating in the creation and the distribution of assets that are not cryptocurrencies, in the sense that I could make a cryptocurrency about a light bulb, and it's not related to the light bulb. It's just called light bulb coin, and it's about great ideas, and like we all buy and sell it, and it has like a price that just is arrived at, irrespective of any real-world value. That's what many and most cryptocurrencies are. Real-world assets are tokens, tokenizations, on-chain tokens. So in that sense, they're similar to cryptocurrencies, but it's dissimilar in the sense that there's an underlying asset. The underlying asset could be a carbon credit, a private equity fund, a piece of real estate, a money market account, treasury, whatever. Everything from core financial stuff to assets at the edges. This is the big trend now driving institutional adoption of blockchain technology, and they don't call it cryptocurrencies, they call it digital assets. And so this digital assets trend is in a whole other stage now from even 2 years ago, because 2 years ago you didn't have dedicated teams. Now most banks have dedicated digital asset team leaders, engineering leaders, product management leaders, and basically those teams are tasked with making progress. Yeah. 2 years ago, you would be working, 3 years ago, you'd be working with people in the innovation group of a bank, yeah, which is primarily tasked with generating experiments. Yeah. But now you have dedicated teams. Some banks have teams of over 100 people on the digital asset side. It's exclusively their job to generate these things. This is the thing, I think, this in addition to a few other changes are things that people in the Web3 community, I think, don't yet fully appreciate, because it's a very significant, it's basically a different world now in institutional blockchain adoption than it was 2 years ago.
And on this front, right, I mean, obviously, I remember the day where there was a lot of innovation teams in banks who were looking at this. Frankly, a lot of it was window dressing. It was more to create POCs and, you know, show that the bank is working on it. And I agree with you, there's been a transition now to the rest of the organization looking at this. What is the biggest challenge when you're speaking to a CTO of a bank or somebody who's running the infrastructure, looking at the infrastructure of the future for a bank? What is the biggest challenge they're having, and how do you think they can be fixed?
So they all kind of go through a pretty similar progression. The progression is, I'm never going to need my own chain. I'm never going to make an asset. I'll just do custody for my clients. Let me go get a custody solution like Fireblocks or something like that, right? Let me go get a custody solution. Then it turns out my competing entities in my space are going to make their own assets. Looks like I can't avoid this. Then they get on this track of, what do I do? The answers there are pretty standard. It's like, I have to choose a chain. Then they go down this like choose a chain rabbit hole. The choose a chain rabbit hole is a really complicated rabbit hole. They have like enterprise blockchains that are being sold to them that don't really perform well. They have Web3 blockchains that are being sold to them that don't meet their compliance needs. And everyone is kind of like trying to get to a golden middle of something that can meet a bank's compliance needs while being relatively performant. On both of those dimensions, current blockchain technology doesn't approach the current levels of what banks need in terms of transactions per second or in terms of privacy and compliance. This is what's really confusing to them. So it's like, I see my counterparts in this other bank, 4 years ago they adopted a blockchain technology, now they're killing it. They're replacing it with another one. They replaced it with that, they replaced the one 4 years ago with one they got 2 years ago, and now they're replacing that one with another one. And so there's like this constant use a blockchain, drop a blockchain type of dynamic where they're switching chains. And this is one of their greatest fears, is that they'll make an infrastructure investment in something that doesn't have a future. And there are literally some of these folks that we've talked to, they've invested, like between engineers, the cost, implementation cost, they've invested over $100 million over 4 years in certain blockchain technologies that they're now just like dropping them. They're just like, this blockchain doesn't work for me, it's not EVM or it's not something, it doesn't do something, I need to switch to another one. So what we do in this situation is we give them something called an abstraction layer. It's literally called the blockchain abstraction layer. And both a lot of computer science and a lot of banking infrastructure is basically layers of technology upon each other, right? That's actually what a lot of computer science is, that's what many programming languages are. They're just ways to make it simpler to use underlying technology. Abstraction, it's called an abstraction layer. So that's what CCIP does for them initially, is it provides this blockchain abstraction layer so that through one integration, they don't need to choose chains anymore. They can now interact with hundreds of chains without the need to make a specific choice. So they no longer need to choose that chain A or B or C is the right one. Through one integration with the Chainlink CCIP blockchain abstraction layer, with that part of CCIP, they get future-proofed, and they get all the current chains that they need for all the basic interactions they need to do. And then the second problem they have, for the people that went down the blockchain rabbit hole and got out on the other end with some understanding, is they very clearly see that everyone is going to have their own chain. So every bank, every asset manager, every exchange, every CS, like just going to be a multitude of chains. And so as you have literally thousands of chains, like one of the folks that we work with is Swift, there's over 11,000 members in Swift member banks, right? So it's over 11,000 banks right there. So there's going to be thousands of chains no matter what. And when I look at the banks that have chains in production, they have 3 or 4 chains. Like JP Morgan has, I think, 3 or 4 chains in production. And that's blockchain technology when it was really complex to do, like circa 2017 blockchain technology. And by the way, blockchain technology is only getting cheaper and easier to do and launch. So everyone's just going to have not one chain, but many chains, probably even many different chain technologies in one bank or one firm. So they basically arrive at the second problem of, even if I successfully launch a blockchain, even if I successfully generate an asset on that blockchain, even if I make that asset work in a synchronized way with data, the liquidity to interact with that asset is going to be in some other chain somewhere. It's going to be on some other blockchain in some other environment. And that's basically the cross-chain liquidity problem of, I have a chain, my chain has an asset, but the other chain has all the purchasing power, or the 10,000 other chains, or eventually really hundreds of thousands of other chains. You can think of chains like as databases, like count how many databases there are, and you'll be approaching something about how many chains there will eventually be. Maybe half as many, but it'll be a ratio relative to that number, in my opinion, because chains fundamentally act as a data structure with some computation inside of them. And so then the cross-chain problem comes along. This is the second thing CCIP solves. So first they get the blockchain abstraction layer to interface with blockchains through one integration in a future-proofed way. And then they are able to interface in a way that does cross-chain, right? So if they have an asset on their chain, and they need to move that asset to another chain in order to complete a transaction. Like someone sends them a stable coin, and they need to send the asset in exchange for the stable coin. They can now receive that stable coin from the other chain, which means they got access to more liquidity, and they can now send that asset to the other chain in order to complete the transaction. And then the people that are at the cross-chain stage, we are working with them basically to set up transactions and to feed all the necessary price, market, reference, identity, and all other types of data into that transaction to make it work, and then to connect all the different chains that they would need to be connected to do the transaction, both on the asset side, sending the asset, and on the payment side, paying for the asset, whether that's in a central bank digital currency, stablecoin, private bank money, basically generating the ability to do transactions by enriching them with critical data and allowing them to connect to the places from which people want to transact.
Because that's interesting, because I can see how here you're solving the liquidity problem, which obviously is going to be very important, especially in a multi-chain environment, and especially if what you mentioned becomes true where there's thousands of chains. But also I can see how the interoperability as well. One last thing, maybe last question in 2 minutes, Sergey, is the privacy element, right? Obviously for all these financial institutions, privacy of data, I mean, has become a big topic. How do you see privacy evolve in this multi-chain environment where having cross-chain liquidity is very important, but how do we ensure data privacy at the same time? Is it ZK models? Is it something we do oracles? Like, I want to hear your views of how you see the vision, the future will pan out from that perspective.
Sure, so CCIP has certain privacy-related features, and there's more of those features coming. So on the cross-chain level, we're very focused on that. We've already been able to generate privacy for certain pieces of data like identity data through zero-knowledge proofs, where our system can verify the identity data to a certain level, return the proof on-chain, but allow the data itself to remain private off-chain, with the proof being enough to prove that the identity requirements are met. So Chainlink has been working on privacy-related technologies really since the beginning. On-chain privacy for the actual contract state has been the main selling point for enterprise blockchain software from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So I've been working with the enterprise folks for over 7 years. So for example, Swift, we've been working with them for over 7 years, which is basically like the whole lifetime of all enterprise blockchain technology. And it's always been privacy as one of the first selling points. Privacy has really not been achieved for on-chain smart contract state.
Yep.
The initial method for privacy in enterprise was to segregate data in ways that only certain nodes had access to certain pieces of data. But that model of privacy fundamentally doesn't really seem to work. You lose all kinds of efficiency and composability and other properties, and that's the crop of enterprise blockchain technologies that are 4 or 5 years old that are now being replaced by like EVM and a few other technologies. Realistically, zero-knowledge proofs provide an incremental solution where you can verify things off-chain, you can do certain computations off-chain. For example, you could do certain amounts of computations in an Oracle network, and you could have a proof that that computation was completed in a certain way, and therefore you can rely on that proof within a chain to say, even though the computation isn't on the chain, the proof of the computation is sufficiently strong that we can rely on it enough to continue the transaction. But now what you're doing is you're splitting the computation of the smart contract between an Oracle network and on-chain on the basis of this tie back via zero-knowledge proofs. And zero-knowledge proofs only in the last, let's say, 3 years became efficient enough to do something like that, and even still their efficiency is in question. The next frontier of this is like homomorphic encryption. So fully homomorphic encryption, FHE, is an interesting technology, but it's really inefficient. Like the pattern of encryption technologies really is, there are encryption technologies that can allow you to achieve privacy. They're just computationally very inefficient. And it's going to take a long time to become efficient. And that's really the thing I would pay attention to is, when does a certain privacy or encryption technology, like when do the gates and when do all the ways that everything works become efficient enough, or the ability to do computations becomes low cost and high powered enough, where you can kind of hit an inflection point. That is an inflection point we've hit with zero-knowledge proofs, maybe like 2 years ago, and see a lot of zero-knowledge proof technologies. Fully homomorphic encryption is next. We're also working on fully homomorphic encryption-related things. But I think true on-chain privacy is still pretty early, basically because the technology, the basic encryption and privacy preserving technology is not efficient or ready.
It'll be very interesting to watch, and especially what you mentioned on homomorphic, I think it's going to be very, very interesting to watch over the next couple of years. Sergey, I have the bell with me. We're going to do quick fire round of questions. We have a minute left, and I need 1 or 2 word answers. You ready?
I don't know, but we'll see. I hope I'm ready.
Well, we'll see. We're in Dubai, Sergey. What's your favorite thing about Dubai?
The people.
People. There we go. One thing I love about you, you studied philosophy. Who's your favorite philosopher of all time?
I don't have a favorite, but right now I'm reading Plutarch again.
Pluto?
Yeah, Plutarch.
If you could go back to school, Sergey, you could go back to university and there's one course you would take that you wish you had taken back in the day, what would that course be?
Probably another philosophy course, probably about Nietzsche or Buddhist philosophy.
Here we go. What is the best advice you ever received?
You can look forwards or you can look backwards. You can't do both.
I like that. If you're not in crypto, what other industry would you be in?
Brain-computer interfaces or genetics.
Wow, I like that. Genetics, I love it. There's rumors that you were Satoshi. If you had one message to, I know, I'm joking.
I'm not Satoshi.
But if you had one message to Satoshi Nakamoto, what would that message be?
Don't disclose who you are.
And to finish it off, Sergey, Sergey Nazarov, the co-founder of Chainlink. Sergey, the typical question that I ask anybody who comes on stage with me, if you could have lunch or dinner with one person dead or alive, lunch or dinner with one person dead or alive, who would you have lunch or dinner with?
Nietzsche.
Here you go, the philosopher in you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. A big hand of applause to Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink. Thank you, Sergey, for everything.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man.